The first time I realized our partnership was a fiction, I was on my hands and knees under my own desk, fishing for a rogue network cable. The dusty, metallic tang of the server in the corner, mixed with the scent of lukewarm pizza from a late-night working dinner I'd eaten alone. My back ached. My eyes were gritty from staring at vectors and color hex codes for 12 hours straight. From the hallway, I heard Chris's laugh, a rich, booming sound that usually felt like a victory siren. Tonight, it just sounded distant. He appeared in my doorway, silhouetted against the bright, empty hall. He was holding his suit jacket over his shoulder, hooked on a single finger. He looked like he'd just come from a GQ shoot, not a client meeting. I, in my wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, looked like I'd been crawling through an air duct. "Knocking it out of the park, Leo," he said, using the nickname he'd given me our first week at the agency. Leo the Lion, for my relentless work ethic. It had felt like a badge of honor once. Now it just felt like a brand. The Henderson presentation is going to blow them away. I just felt the vibe in the room. They're ready to sign. I pushed myself up, my knee popping in protest. The Henderson presentation isn't finished, Chris. The interactive mock-ups are still buggy. I told you that this morning. He waved a dismissive hand, his smile never faltering. Details. They don't buy the details, Leo. They buy the vision. They buy the story. And I sold them a hell of a story. He leaned against the doorframe. "We're celebrating. Come on. Drinks are on me." "I can't," I said, gesturing to the 3 glowing monitors on my desk, each littered with open software and half-rendered designs. "The story doesn't work if the product falls apart when they click a button." His smile tightened at the edges, just a fraction. "It'll be fine. You always get it done. That's your superpower." He said it like a compliment, but it landed like a command. "You will get this done. You will make my story true." "Suit yourself. I'll expense the whiskey. Charge it to client cultivation." He winked and turned, his footsteps echoing confidently down the hall. I stood there, the silence of the office pressing in on me. This was our dynamic. Chris was the front man, the visionary, the one who could walk into a room of skeptical executives and have them eating out of his hand within 10 minutes. I was the engine room, the one who kept the lights on and the ship moving forward. For years, it had felt like a perfect symbiotic partnership. We'd started this, Kepler and Croft design, in my living room, fueled by cheap coffee and the arrogant certainty of our mid-20s that we were better, smarter, and more creative than anyone at the sterile agency where we'd met. Back then, Chris's grandiosity was infectious. My meticulousness was reassuring. We were a team. But success had acted like a solvent, slowly dissolving the glue between us. The more clients we brought in, the more the money grew from a trickle to a steady stream, the more our roles solidified into a hierarchy. He was the sun. I was a planet in his orbit. His vision became law. My execution became a given, an expected function, like the electricity that powered our computers. The first real crack appeared 6 months before the night under the desk. We just landed our biggest client yet, a boutique hotel chain called the Oasis Group. The contract was substantial, enough to finally hire a junior designer and give us both a real salary. Chris had handled the negotiations alone. When he slid the signed contract across the table to me, my eyes immediately went to the top line. "It's just your name," I'd said, my voice carefully neutral. He'd looked up from his phone, feigning surprise. "Is it? Must have been an oversight from their legal team. You know how these template documents are." "Don't worry, partner. It's just a formality. We're both right here in the body." He tapped a section that detailed the parties involved, where my name was indeed listed. An oversight. A formality. I'd wanted to believe him. The euphoria of landing the account was still buzzing in my veins. So I'd nodded, filed the unease away in a dark corner of my mind, and got to work.
I built the Oasis Group a stunning brand identity, from the ground up. A custom typeface inspired by Art Deco travel posters, a color palette of warm sands and deep aquas, a website that felt less like a booking engine and more like a portal to a private island. Chris presented it. They loved it. They loved him. He started taking more meetings alone. He'd come back with promises and handshake deals, and I'd be left to decipher the notes he'd scrawled on a napkin and turn them into a functional product. He began referring to the company as my firm in casual conversation with new contacts. When I corrected him once, in front of a potential vendor, he just laughed and clapped me on the back. He's the conscience of the operation, keeps me honest. The vendor had laughed with him. I'd forced a smile.
The resentment began as a low, persistent hum, a frequency only I could hear beneath the daily noise of deadlines and deliverables. I started noticing the little things. How he'd take the lead chair in conference rooms, positioning me to the side. How he'd paraphrase my technical explanations to clients, often getting them slightly wrong, but with a confidence that made his version sound more authoritative. How my ideas in brainstorming sessions were met with the thoughtful, interesting. But if he repeated them 5 minutes later, they were suddenly brilliant. I was becoming a ghost in my own company. My work was everywhere, but my presence was fading. The final, shattering blow came on a Tuesday. I was setting up a new cloud backup system for all our project files. It was a tedious, necessary piece of digital housekeeping that Chris would never deign to understand. I needed the login credentials for the master administrative account for our primary domain and business registry. I called the registration service, armed with the company's tax ID and my official title as co-founder. After navigating a maze of automated menus, I reached a human. I explained the situation. There was a long pause, the clacking of a keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir," the woman said, her voice polite but firm. "The domain, keplercroftdesign.com, is registered under a single private individual, a Christopher Miller. For security reasons, I cannot grant you administrative access without his explicit authorization." The world didn't slow down. It didn't need to. It simply focused, with a terrifying, laser-like precision, on the feeling of the phone pressed against my ear. The plastic felt suddenly cold. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice strangely calm. "We're partners. It's a company." "I understand, sir, but according to our records, the registrant is an individual. It's not uncommon for small businesses. Would you like me to send a reset link to the email on file? It's listed as christopher.miller@keplercroftdesign.
His email? Not a generic admin address. His. "No," I heard myself say. "That won't be necessary. Thank you for your help." I hung up. I sat in my ergonomic chair, in the office I helped pay for, surrounded by the products of my labor, and felt the foundation of the last decade of my life turn to quicksand beneath me. Just in case. He hadn't just built a business with me, he'd built a trap door, and he was standing on it, with his hand on the lever, smiling. I found him in his office, feet up on the desk, talking animatedly on the phone. He saw me in the doorway and held up a finger. 1 minute. He was finalizing a lunch reservation for a client. I stood there, the hum of resentment in my head swelling to a roar. I watched his face, so effortlessly charming, so sure of his place in the world. He was the public face of everything I had built. He owned the very name of it. He finished the call, his smile shifting from client-ready to partner-casual. "What's up, Leo? You look like you just saw a server crash." "The domain," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the tremor I felt in my hands. "The company domain and the business registry. Why are they only in your name?" The smile on his face didn't vanish, but it changed. It shed its warmth and became something colder, more calculated. It was the smile of a poker player who'd just been called, but knew he was still holding the winning hand. He slowly lowered his feet from the desk and leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "Come on, man," he said, his tone placating but with an edge of steel beneath it. "When we were starting out, it was just easier to handle the paperwork on my end. You were always buried in the creative. I was handling the biz dev stuff."
That's not an answer, Chris. We're partners. 50-50. That was the deal. And it still is, he said, spreading his hands wide. This is just a technicality, a formality. It doesn't change anything. The company is ours. A formality that gives you sole control over our digital front door, I said. A formality that means you could, theoretically, lock me out of my own business tomorrow. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the moment he decided to stop pretending. The affable mask slipped entirely. His eyes, usually so full of manufactured warmth, were flat and hard. "Theo," he said, using my real name, a deliberate shift to signal seriousness. "Let's be realistic for a second. Who brought in the Oasis Group? Who closed the Henderson deal? Who's out there every day selling the dream, making the connections that pay for this office, for your salary?" He leaned back in his chair, the king on his throne. "This business runs on relationships, on vision, and that's me. You're a brilliant technician, the best I've ever seen. But let's not confuse roles. You wouldn't last a month out there without me to bring the clients in." The words hung in the air between us, not as a heated insult thrown in a fight, but as a cold, calculated statement of fact as he saw it. They were so clean, so precise, they didn't even leave a bruise at first. They simply cut, deep and silent, severing something vital. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. What was the point? He had just handed me the blueprint of his perception of our world. In it, I was a replaceable component, an employee, a luxury. I looked at him, at the smug certainty in his face, and I knew. Talking was the tool of the powerless. It was what you did when you still believed the other person was listening. Chris hadn't been listening for a long, long time. A strange, icy calm settled over me. The roaring in my head ceased. The quicksand beneath my feet became something hard and unyielding. I nodded slowly, as if considering his point. "Right," I said, my voice quiet. "I see." I turned and walked out of his office. I didn't go back to my desk. I walked out of the building, into the indifferent afternoon sun. I stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by people going about their lives, and I started planning. Not with hot, messy anger, but with the cold, methodical precision of an engineer facing a critical systems failure. He thought I was just the technician, the grunt, the silent partner. He was about to learn that the quietest parts of a machine are often the most essential, and that when you remove them, the whole apparatus doesn't just slow down, it seizes, it shatters. He said I wouldn't last a month without him. I was going to make sure he was the one who didn't. The days that followed were an exercise in surreal duality. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to the office, I attended meetings, I met my deadlines with the same relentless efficiency I was known for. I was the model partner, the reliable engine. But beneath the placid surface, a new identity was being forged. The architect, the ghost.
My revenge would not be a dramatic explosion. It would be a silent, systematic repossession. I would not take from him what was his. I would take back what was always, fundamentally, mine. The client list, the project files, the proprietary design templates, the intricate workflow systems I'd coded to streamline our production. These were not company assets. They were my life's work, the output of my intellect and my sweat. Chris had provided the stage, but I had written the play, built the sets, and trained the actors. Now, I was taking my script and moving to a new theater. The planning required a discipline that bordered on the monastic. Every evening, after Chris had left, proclaiming some dinner or drinks engagement, I would work. But I was no longer working for Kepler and Croft. I was working for the future. I began with an audit. I created a hidden, encrypted directory on a private server I rented under a pseudonym. I labeled it Archive. One by one, I began copying the core of our business into it. It was a digital exodus. The master brand guide for the Oasis Group, every vector, every font file, every iteration. The complex back-end architecture for the Henderson project, thousands of lines of my custom code. The client database with every contact, every note, every past project history. I didn't just take the final products, I took the raw materials, the source files, the very DNA of our work. It was painstaking, tedious work. The slow transfer of large files, the need to cover my digital tracks, the constant low-grade fear of discovery. But with every gigabyte that slid from the company's server to my own, I felt a piece of my soul being returned to me. This wasn't theft, it was emancipation.
During the day, I observed Chris with the detached focus of a biologist studying a specimen. I noted his patterns, his blind spots. His arrogance was my greatest ally. He was so convinced of his own indispensability, so certain that the technical backbone of the company was a boring, static utility, that he never looked at it. He never noticed the faint additional network activity in the dead of night. He never wondered why I was suddenly so interested in consolidating and backing up our legacy data. He saw my increased hours as dedication, a response to his pep talk. It fed his ego, making him even more insufferable and, crucially, less observant. A month into my silent project, I took the first tangible step. During my lunch break, I visited a small vacant office space on the other side of the city. It was a single room on the third floor of an old, brick-faced building, with a view of a narrow alley and the fire escape of the building next door. It was everything our current, bright, modern, open-plan office was not. It was quiet, humble, and most importantly, it was mine. I bought the single desk, a chair, and a powerful computer. I set it up myself on a Saturday, the hollow echo of my footsteps in the empty room, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of our shared space. This barren office was my beachhead. The most delicate part of the operation was the clients. I couldn't poach them openly. That would be too obvious, too messy. But I could lay the groundwork. I started with the ones I had the strongest rapport with, the ones who specifically asked for me by name when they had a technical question or a complex revision. A phone call with Brenda from the Oasis Group was the first test. "Brenda, it's Theo from Kepler and Croft," I said, my voice casual.
CEO, thank God. Chris sent over the mock-ups, but the mobile rendering is completely broken. You're the only one who speaks this language. I'm looking at it now, I said, clicking through the files on my personal laptop. It's a caching issue on the server. Chris probably just sent you the old link.
I've set up a new, more stable dev environment for situations like this. Let me give you the direct URL. Bookmark this one. It's my personal server, so it's always up to date. It was a small thing, a helpful suggestion, but it was also the first thread, pulled from the tapestry of Kepler and Croft and woven into the new one I was creating. I did this a handful of times, with a handful of key clients. I became their secret, reliable backchannel. When Chris's big promises met the hard wall of technical reality, I was there, not as a representative of Kepler and Croft, but as Theo, the magician who could fix anything. I never said a bad word about Chris. I never had to. My competence, in the face of his increasing detachment from the actual work, was indictment enough. The tension in our office became a physical thing, a thick, silent humidity that made it hard to breathe. We were like two planets whose orbits were decaying, destined for a catastrophic collision. He sensed a shift in me, but he misinterpreted it as sullenness, as a lack of team spirit. "You need to get out of this cave more, Theo," he'd say, gesturing at my office. "Come to the Henderson launch party next week. Network a little. It's good for you." I'd just smile faintly. "Someone has to make sure the party has a website to launch, Chris." He'd shake his head, a master pitying his hopeless apprentice, and leave me to my cave.
The date I'd circled in my mental calendar was a Friday in October. Chris had a full-day pitch with a potential new client, a sporting goods company he was desperately excited about. He would be out of the office, completely unreachable, from 8 a.m. until at least 6 p.m. It was the perfect window. The night before, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, running through the sequence of events in my mind, over and over, like a pilot reviewing a pre-flight checklist. There was no excitement, no gleeful anticipation, only a cold, grim certainty. This was a surgical strike. It was necessary. It was just. Friday morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else. The air was still and silent. I went straight to my desk, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I plugged in the high-capacity portable drive. I opened the secure transfer protocol to my private server. The list of active projects was displayed on my screen: Henderson, Oasis, and 4 others. These were the lifeblood of Kepler and Croft, the projects that paid the bills, the ones with imminent deadlines and demanding clients. I highlighted them all. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and anticipation. I clicked drag. I clicked drop. A progress bar appeared on the screen, green light steadily filling the empty rectangle. It was faster than I'd anticipated. My connection was good. The files, though vast, were well organized. I sat and watched the bar crawl across the screen. This was the point of no return. There was a strange, hollow feeling in my chest, the emotional equivalent of an evacuated room. 2 hours later, it was done. Every active project, every piece of critical data now existed in 2 places: on the dying star of Kepler and Croft's server, and on the newborn planet of my own. I securely wiped my transfer logs. I unplugged the portable drive. I stood up from my desk for the last time.
I had already taken home my personal effects over the previous weeks. A few books, a framed photo of my father, a lucky trinket from my first freelance job. The desk was now sterile, generic, just as it had been the day I first sat down, a workspace for a ghost who had already departed. I walked out of the office, leaving the lights on, the computers humming. I didn't look back. I drove across town to my new empty office. I sat at my new desk, in the profound silence, and I waited. Monday morning.
I dressed with more care than usual. A crisp, button-down shirt. A jacket. I wasn't going to work. I was going to a funeral. I arrived at the Kepler and Croft office at 9:05 a.m., late enough for the morning chaos to have begun. I could already feel the wrongness in the air. The junior designer, a young woman named Maya, was frantically clicking her mouse, her face pale. "Theo, thank God! The Henderson files, they're gone! The server folder is empty!" Chris was in his office, on the phone, his voice a low, tense snarl. "I don't care what your system says. We had them yesterday. No, there is no backup. That's the point." He saw me through the glass wall. His eyes were wide, panicked. He slammed the phone down and burst out of his office. "Theo, the server! Something's happened! Everything's gone!" I looked at him, my face a placid mask. I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just emptiness. "I know," I said, my voice calm.
He stared at me, confusion warring with dawning horror. "What do you mean, you know? Did you find a backup? Did you—" "I transferred the files," I said, cutting him off, "to my secure server. For safekeeping." The relief on his face was instantaneous, a tidal wave of it. He almost sagged against the doorframe. "Jesus, Leo, you scared the hell out of me. Don't do that." Okay, good. Restore them. Now. Henderson is having a meltdown." I didn't move. "I'm not going to restore them, Chris." The relief evaporated, replaced by a deeper, colder confusion. "What? What do you mean? This isn't funny." "It's not meant to be funny." I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out a single, sealed envelope. I held it out to him. "This is my resignation. Effective immediately." He didn't take it. He just stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. His brain was trying to process the information, to fit the square peg of my actions into the round hole of his worldview. It wouldn't go. What is this?" he finally managed, his voice a whisper. "It's over, Chris. The partnership is dissolved. I'm leaving." The panic in his eyes was now morphing into anger, the cornered animal kind. "You can't just leave. You can't take the files. That's theft. That's our intellectual property." I actually smiled then, a thin, cold curve of my lips. "Is it? Check the registrations, Chris. Check the contracts. You were very clear about what was yours and what was a formality. The work I did, the systems I built, the clients I managed, I'm just taking my tools and going home." I placed the envelope on the corner of his desk. "You were right, by the way. You said I wouldn't last a month without you." I looked him dead in the eye, letting him see the architect, the ghost, the man he'd never truly seen. Turns out, I don't have to. I turned and walked towards the main door. The entire office was silent, watching. "Theo!" he roared from behind me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out the door, into the hallway, and pressed the elevator button. The last sound I heard from Kepler and Croft was the shattered, impotent scream of a man who had just realized the foundation of his kingdom was, and always had been, another man's work. And that man was gone. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside. The doors closed, silencing his world forever. The silence in my new office was absolute. There was no hum of computers, no murmur of colleagues, no ringing phones. Just the faint, distant sound of traffic from the alley below and the beat of my own heart. I sat at my desk, the envelope containing the business license for Stratagem Design lying in front of me. The deed was done. The war, such as it was over in a single bloodless morning.
I didn't feel euphoric. I felt post-operative. There was a numbness, the psychic anesthesia that follows the removal of a diseased but deeply connected part of oneself. Chris had been my friend, my partner, my brother in arms for over a decade. Excising him from my life had been a necessary amputation. But the phantom limb pains began almost immediately.
The first days were a flood of controlled chaos, but it was my chaos. My phone started ringing at 9:01 a.m. that Monday. It was Brenda from the Oasis group. "Theo, Chris is having some kind of meltdown over here. He's saying you quit and the files are gone. What the hell is going on?" I was calm, professional. "It's true, Brenda. I've left Kepler and Croft. I've started my own firm, Stratagem Design. And you'll be relieved to know that the Oasis project files are safe, fully intact, and right here with me. I can have you back up and running by this afternoon." There was a long, pregnant pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the corporate calculus whirring in her brain, the risk assessment. Chris was the relationship, but I was the product, and the product was currently in my possession. "We have a contract with Kepler and Croft," she said, her voice cautious. "You have a contract for a deliverable," I corrected gently, "and I am the only person on Earth who can deliver it to you on time and to the quality you expect. Chris doesn't have the technical capacity to open the files, let alone work on them. My terms are the same. My attention to your project will be even greater." Another pause. Then, decisively, "Send me the new onboarding paperwork." Click. One by one, they came. The Henderson Group, 2 of the other 4 active clients. They followed the work. They followed the certainty. They followed me. It wasn't even a difficult decision for most of them. Chris had sold himself as the face of the company, but in doing so, he had made himself redundant the moment the facade cracked. I was the substance, and substance, it turned out, was what paid the bills.
The other half of the client list, the ones more personally loyal to Chris or with contract he could legally cling to, stayed. For a time. I heard the rumors through the industry grapevine, the missed deadlines, the plummeting quality. Chris, in a desperate attempt to survive, hired 2 junior designers to replace me, but they couldn't decipher my custom-coded workflows. They didn't understand the intricate logic of the systems I'd built. They were trying to fly a spaceship with the operator's manual for a bicycle. The Kepler and Croft website went down for 3 days in November. The domain, the one he'd registered in his name alone, had expired. He'd been so busy putting out fires, he'd forgotten to pay the bill. The irony was so perfect, it was painful. I worked. I buried myself in the familiar, comforting grind of pixels and code. Stratagem Design was lean, efficient, and profitable from day one. I had no partner to argue with, no one to dismiss my concerns as details. The silence was my new partner. The autonomy was my new reward. I rented a better office, one with a view of the city skyline. I hired a sharp, quiet project manager to handle the client communications I still loathed. My business grew, not with the explosive, fragile growth of Chris's big dreams, but with the steady, durable growth of a thing built correctly from the ground up. 6 months to the day after I walked out, I got the email. It was from a commercial real estate agent, a cold inquiry. The subject line read, "Interest in former Kepler and Croft office space." The body was polite, asking if I, as a former principal, knew of any outstanding issues with the premises, as the lease had been terminated abruptly. So, it was over.
He'd shut it down. The kingdom had fallen. I felt a pang then, sharp and unexpected, not of victory, but of loss. I had wanted this. I had planned for it. I had executed it with flawless precision. But the sight of those words, "Lease had been terminated abruptly," felt like an obituary for a part of my own life. A week later, my private cell phone rang late on a Thursday evening. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew. I knew with a cold certainty in my gut. I let it ring 3 times, the shrill sound cutting through the quiet of my new apartment, before I answered. "Hello?" There was a long exhalation of breath on the other end, ragged, as if the act of breathing was a struggle. "Theo." It was Chris, but it wasn't his voice, not the rich, confident baritone I'd known. This was a shredded, raw thing, eroded by stress and defeat. "Chris," I said, my tone flat, giving him nothing. He started, then his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, a wet, unpleasant sound. "You killed it. You killed everything we built." I said nothing. The silence was its own accusation. "You could have just talked to me," he whispered, and the plea in his voice was so naked, so broken, that for a moment the architect in me faltered, and I was just Tio again, the kid in the living room with his friend. "You could have just talked to me."
The words hung in the static between us, a devastatingly simple appeal to a history that no longer existed. He was rewriting our past, casting himself as the reasonable one, the one who would have listened. And the most terrifying part was that a sliver of me, the ghost of the man I used to be, wanted to believe him. I almost said it. The words were right there, on my tongue, poised to spill out. "I did talk to you, Chris. For years, I talked with my concerns, with my frustrations, with my work. You just never heard me. You were too busy listening to the sound of your own voice." But I didn't. What would have been the point? It would have been just more talk, and we were long, long past that. He hadn't called for understanding. He had called because he was drowning, and he needed to make me the anchor that was dragging him down. I let the silence stretch, let it become a chasm he could not cross. He understood. I heard it in the way his breathing hitched, then steadied into something hollow. "Yeah," he said, the word of final surrender. "Okay." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, a monotonous, electronic requiem for a dead friendship.
Now, I have everything I used to think I wanted. My own name on the door, my own clients, my own decisions. The freedom is absolute. The victory is complete. By any objective measure, I won. I outmaneuvered him. I outlasted him. I proved him wrong in the most definitive way possible. And still, some nights, like tonight, I catch myself. I'll be looking over a profit and loss statement that is all mine, or sketching a concept for a client who sought me out from my mind, not my partner's pitch, and the thought will slither in, unbidden. Did I really win? The question isn't about the business. The business is a success. The question is about the cost. The question is about the man I had to become to do it. The ghost, the architect, the silent, plotting thing in the dark. I had to become as ruthless, as calculating as he was dismissive. To prove I wasn't his employee, I had to become his destroyer. He said I couldn't make it without him. And the truth is, I didn't. I only made it because of him. Because of the white-hot fury his betrayal ignited. Because of the lesson he taught me about trust and power and the price of your own name.
The man I am today, the successful, independent, solitary man, was forged in the crucible of his condescension. My empire is built from the bricks of the wall he tried to build around me.
I proved him right in another, more terrible way. My success is irrevocably tied to his failure. They are two sides of the same coin. I can never fully enjoy the view from my office window without seeing, in the reflection, the ghost of his smile from across my desk, and hearing his voice, raw and broken on the phone. I won the war. I scorched the earth. And some nights, standing in the silence of my own kingdom, I wonder if the smoke will ever truly clear. What defines a true victory? The achievement of the goal, or the price paid to reach it? Share your thoughts on the most complex moral dilemma you've encountered in a story. For new tales of ambition, betrayal, and the cost of success, subscribe for new videos every day.